you have found your way into this message because something ancient in your psyche has begun to stir, something older than your fears, older than the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you have lost. When the universe prepares a comeback for a soul, it does not begin with victory. It begins with disturbance, with the tremor in the unconscious, with the subtle cracking of the inner shell that has kept your deeper nature from breaking through. And when I speak of a comeback, I do not mean the superficial triumphs. The ego chases the return to a former identity or the reclaiming of external conditions. No, a true comeback in the Jungian sense is the return of the self to the center of your life, the re-emergence of the forgotten, the neglected, the buried, rising like a primordial God from the depths. You are reading this because you have felt the shaking, you have sensed the quiet rumble under the surface of your daily life. Perhaps it came as a restlessness you could not name, or as a sadness you assumed was a sign of regression, or as a sudden fatigue that made you believe you were falling backward. But very often, the greatest inner movements disguise themselves as collapse. The psyche knows that before it resurrects you, it must first remove the version of you that cannot carry the future you are meant to inhabit. And so the universe begins its mysterious work by undoing what the ego clings to, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. For no comeback worth living arises from the personality that created your suffering. It arises from the deeper self waiting behind the personality, watching quietly, intervening only when the moment is ripe. What you call resistance, I call initiation. What you call loss, I call the opening of the symbolic gate. What you call confusion is often the veil being lifted at the wrong angle, revealing fragments prematurely. And what you mistake for abandonment is usually the unconscious withdrawing you from people and environments that can no longer accompany the next stage of your becoming. If you are honest with yourself, you will admit that you have felt this separation, a subtle estrangement from the world you once knew, a sense that conversations you used to tolerate now drain you, a recognition that certain relationships were built on versions of you that no longer exist. This alienation is not failure. It is the psyche reclaiming its territory, like a forest regrowing after a long drought. The forest does not apologize when it pushes away the old weeds. Your unconscious is doing the same. You are reading this now because your psyche has begun the slow alchemical work of preparing you for your own return, not to who you were, but to who you were meant to become before life wounded you into forgetting. And the universe, which speaks not through words but through symbols, synchronicities, and strange inner urgings, has guided you to this moment. Because the old cycle is closing with more finality than you realize. There is a moment in every human life when the unconscious initiates what I used to call the individuation sequence, the soul's movement toward its own integrity. This movement begins subtly with dreams that feel unusually charged, with archetypal symbols that appear in your waking life, with inexplicable emotions that rise like tides without visible cause. You may feel as though you are slipping away from your own habits, unable to relate to your former self. But this is not decline. This is the self descending. Before they come back, there is always a descent. The ancient myths knew this long before modern psychology gave it language. The hero is swallowed by the whale. The wanderer is taken into the underworld. The seeker passes through the dark forest where no sunlight reaches the soil. You, too, have been in such a forest perhaps longer than you wish to admit, and like all wanderers who are preparing to rise, you have mistaken the darkness for punishment when it was actually gestation. The universe places you in darkness not to silence you, but to reform you. When the caterpillar dissolves inside the cocoon, it is not dying, though it feels like it. It is liquefying into the essential form that will later become the wings. Many people interrupt their transformation because they panic during this liquefaction, believing they are losing themselves. But what is truly happening is the stripping of the false self, the outdated persona, the pleasing mask, the inherited expectations, the borrowed dreams until nothing remains but the raw psychic material needed for individuality. That is where you are now, in the dissolving stage, the liquefaction of the old identity, the thinning of the veil between the conscious and the unconscious, the symbolic death before the re-emergence. And if you pay close attention, you will notice that life has already begun removing what cannot accompany the next phase. Some people have drifted away, some desires have fallen silent, some ambitions no longer entice the ego as they once did. These are not losses, they are the shedding of the unnecessary, like the snake removing the skin that no longer fits. You may still cling to that old skin, thinking it protects you, but the universe never prepares a comeback by allowing you to hide. It prepares you by revealing you first to yourself, then to the world. And revelation always feels uncomfortable. When the psyche turns inward, illuminating its unexamined corners, the shadows begin to move. The parts of you that you rejected, suppressed, genied, or feared begin to speak. They whisper through dreams, through emotional triggers, through sudden fatigue, through the discomfort you feel around certain people. Many of the individuals who hurt you were simply activating parts of your own shadow that needed to be seen, acknowledged, and integrated. This is why you could not rise before. You were fragmented. You were divided between the persona you showed to the world and the deeper self you kept hidden in the unconscious. You were cut in half by childhood conditioning, by cultural expectations, by the wounds you inherited from those who shaped you with their own unresolved pain. A comeback is impossible in such a fractured state. The universe waits for wholeness. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means inner unity, the alignment of the conscious personality with the deeper truths of your being. And that unity is exactly what the universe is now calling forth in you. But before unity comes the confrontation, Before light comes recognition of darkness. Before the phoenix rises, there's always the burning. You have felt the burning of frustration, the burning of confusion, the burning of watching your old life fall apart no matter how tightly you try to hold it together. This burning has not been meaningless. It has been the symbolic fire, the psychic furnace in which your outdated self-concepts have been melted down so the essential gold can be extracted. Alchemy was never about turning lead into literal gold. It was a psychological metaphor for transforming the dense, unconscious material of the psyche into enlightened awareness. And you, though you may not have realized it, have been undergoing your own alchemical process. The universe has been applying pressure, heat, and disruption, not to punish you, but to refine you. And refinement is always uncomfortable, at the threshold of every great transformation. The ego trembles, for it knows that once the self begins to emerge, it will no longer be in control. The ego fears change because it associates change with death. But in reality, transformation does not kill the ego. It simply dethrones it. It allows a wiser, deeper intelligence to lead. This is why your life has felt unstable. The throne inside you is being rearranged. There is something inside you, call it the archetype of the warrior, the ancient king, the divine child, or the healer that has been dormant for years, perhaps decades. That archetype is now awakening, and whenever an archetype awakens, life reorganizes itself around its energy. The people who once intimidated you lose their power. The situations that once overwhelmed you become transparent. The fears that once paralyzed you loosen their grip. Because archetypes do not rise alone, they rise with courage. This courage is not the dramatic bravery portrayed in stories. It is a quiet, steady, inner flame, a flame that remains lit even when the winds of life blow mercilessly. You have kept that flame alive through heartbreak, disappointment, exhaustion, self-doubt, and periods of inner exile. That flame is the reason your comeback is now inevitable. The universe does not prepare a resurgence for those who have extinguished their inner light. It prepares it for those who have guarded it, even in darkness. You sensed it recently, a strange intuition that something is shifting, a vision of yourself that feels more aligned than the person you see in the mirror, a pulling sensation in the chest, as if something is calling you toward a future you cannot yet describe. This is not imagination. It is psychic foresight, the unconscious revealing glimpses of the path ahead, not to show you the destination, but to reassure you that the path exists. And so the universe orchestrates subtle synchronicities to confirm what your intuition already knows. A sentence you needed to hear, a sign that appears at the exact moment doubt begins to grow. A dream that repeats the same symbol in different forms, a coincidence too precise to dismiss. These are not accidents. They are the language of the unconscious The way the universe communicates, when the ego is not listening, you are being led, even when you feel lost, especially when you feel lost, for the path of individuation is not a straight line, it is a spiral. You return to old emotions, old wounds, old patterns, not because you are failing, but because each return occurs at a higher level of consciousness. You are not circling, you are ascending in a shape the mind cannot easily perceive. And this ascent is the foundation of your powerful comeback, not a comeback to please others, or to prove yourself, or to reclaim something external, but a comeback to your own essence, the part of you that was buried beneath roles, fears, and expectations. The universe does not prepare superficial victories, it prepares inner resurrections. And yours has already begun. And as this resurrection unfolds, you may notice something peculiar, a sense of standing between two realities, the one that is dissolving and the one that has not yet taken form. This in-between space is uncomfortable, almost disorienting, because the psyche is no longer anchored in the familiar, yet not securely rooted in the new. It feels like a psychological twilight, a borderland where shadows lengthen and the ordinary rules of life seem suspended. Many fear this liminal space and rush to rebuild their old identities simply to escape the uncertainty. But you, whether consciously or unconsciously, have resisted the temptation to retreat. That resistance is not weakness, it is the confirmation that your unconscious has chosen evolution over repetition. In this threshold state, the universe speaks with unusual clarity to those who know how to listen. You may feel as though intuitive impressions are arriving more frequently, sensations without logic, sullen inner messages, an inexplicable calm beneath the chaos. This is because your ego, having loosened its rigid grip, no longer blocks the communications of the deeper self. What feels like randomness is often guidance. What feels like coincidence is often direction. What feels like chance is often orchestration by the unconscious, aligning external events with your internal readiness. The true comeback does not begin when circumstances improve. It begins when the psyche shifts its center of gravity, and your center has been shifting slowly, silently, but unmistakably. You are no longer motivated by the same fears. You are no longer seduced by the same illusions. You are no longer willing to betray yourself for approval or belonging. This internal reorientation is the earliest sign that destiny is changing its course within you. For destiny is not imposed from outside, it is activated from within. When the self begins to reclaim its rightful throne, you may wonder why so much had to collapse, why relationships fell apart, why opportunities slipped away, why people misjudged you, mistreated you, or simply walked out of your life, why you were forced into stretches of solitude you did not ask for. These are painful mysteries, but they are not without purpose. When the unconscious prepares a soul for its next stage, it often orchestrates endings that the ego would never initiate on its own. The ego clings to routines, to familiar pain, to roles that confirm its identity, even when those roles suffocate the spirit. But the self cannot rise in confined spaces. It must break the structures that confine you. Even if doing so feels like breaking you, what you perceived as abandonment was often liberation in disguise. The people who left were completing their symbolic function in your psychic development. They were catalysts, mirrors that forced you to confront shadows you had neglected. Teachers who taught through pain, archetypal figures who appeared in your story not to stay but to awaken. Some were embodiments of the trickster, disrupting your illusion. Others carried the energy of the shadow, exposing your wounds. Others still were temporary guardians, carrying you through a chapter you were not strong enough to navigate alone. And when their archetypal purpose was complete, they withdrew, making space for the next figures in your psychic drama. To the untrained eye, these departures look tragic, but to the psyche, they are necessary transitions. Every great myth involves the shedding of companions who cannot cross the final threshold with the hero, not because they are bad, but because their presence would hold the emerging self back. You are not meant to walk your entire life with the same people. Some were only ever meant to accompany one chapter of your evolution. The universe removes them not to wound you, but to prevent stagnation. And yet, the loneliness that followed these departures has its own sacred function. Solitude is often the birthplace of individuation. When the world goes silent, the unconscious speaks more loudly. When external voices fade, the inner voice becomes audible, and when you stand alone, the self steps forward to guide you. Many people avoid solitude because it confronts them with their unintegrated parts. But you, by enduring it, have demonstrated your readiness for depth. The psyche grants vision only to those who have walked through their own night. In your solitude, you may have encountered dreams that felt unusually vivid, symbolic, or emotionally charged. Dreams in which old rooms appeared representing outdated identities. Dreams of water symbolizing the unconscious rising to the surface. Dreams of animals embodying instinctual powers, returning to awareness. Dreams of climbing, falling, or wandering through labyrinths, marking the psychic reorganization underway. These dreams were not random. They were messages from the deeper layers of your being, attempting to reorder your inner world. Some nights, you may have awakened with a sense of heaviness, as if carrying emotions that did not belong solely to you. This weight often indicates the stirring of the collective unconscious ancient human patterns surfacing through your psyche. For when an individual begins a comeback, it is rarely a purely personal event. It often resonates with archetypal themes shared by humanity. People undergoing deep transformation unknowingly channel energies from the collective, the hero rising from the ashes, the wounded healer reclaiming power, the exiled soul returning with wisdom, the phoenix emerging from fire. These energies intensify your emotional experience, not because you are fragile, but because you are connected. You have felt this connection in moments when your pain seemed larger than your circumstances, when your longing felt ancient, when your intuition seemed older than your physical years. This is the signature of individuation, the sense that your personal journey is woven into something much greater. Your comeback is not merely your own, it echoes a universal pattern. It is the universe remembering itself through you. And yet, the ego resists this magnitude. It clings to explanations rooted in fear. It tells you that you are behind, that you have failed, that you have been forgotten. But the psyche knows differently. It knows that the greatest awakenings begin in apparent stagnation. It knows that the soul gathers power in silence. It knows that transformation often looks from the outside like retreat. The ego sees collapse. The self sees preparation. To understand why your comeback is unstoppable, you must recognize the hidden work that has already been completed. You have endured experiences that would have shattered many others. You have carried emotional burdens without fully understanding their origin. You have faced rejection, betrayal, misunderstanding, and loss. And yet, something in you refused to die. The flame endured, and endurance is not passive. It is a profound psychic achievement. The unconscious does not invest in souls that cannot hold the weight of destiny. The fact that you are still standing is evidence that you are being shaped for something larger. If you reflect honestly, you will notice that your perspective has changed in ways you did not consciously choose. The things that once consumed you no longer possess the same power. The people who once frightened you now appear small. The habits that once numbed you are losing their appeal. This is not self-improvement. It is metamorphosis. The self is rearranging your priorities. What once mattered no longer fits. What once felt impossible now feels inevitable. You are being prepared for reality more aligned with your inner truth, but every ascent requires a letting go. You cannot rise while clutching the rubble of your old life. You cannot step into your comeback while clinging to identities shaped by woundedness. You cannot embody your deeper self while maintaining relationships built on the persona. And so the universe has begun removing the illusions. The people who could not understand your depths were never meant to accompany your expansion. The opportunities that slipped away were misaligned with your destiny. The closed doors were divine interventions, not punishments. You are not being pushed backward. You are being rerouted. Guidance often disguises itself as disruption when the ego refuses to listen. And your ego has been loud shaped by fear, shaped by the need for safety, shaped by the belief that suffering is somehow familiar and therefore secure. But the deeper self has grown louder And when the self calls, the universe obeys. Life bends around the individual who aligns with their own truth. There is a moment in every psychological transformation when the individual realizes that their suffering was not meaningless. It was directional. It was pointing them toward wholeness, integrity, courage, and authenticity. Your suffering was not random. It was the map. It revealed the exact places where your soul asked to be healed. And healing is not the soft, gentle process. People imagine healing is fire. It burns away illusions, attachments, false identities, and unworthy relationships. It demands honesty, vulnerability, and courage. It confronts you with truths you spend years avoiding. Your darkest moments were initiations, not punishments. The nights you cried without knowing why. The days when exhaustion consumed you. The times when nothing made sense. The seasons of despair. All were phases of the psyche preparing you for emergence. You were not breaking down. You were breaking open. And now, you stand at the edge of a new psychic reality. The universe is not preparing you for a small return. It is preparing you for a rebirth, a reorganization of your inner world so profound that your outer world will eventually have no choice but to reflect it. The comeback is already in motion. It does not wait for external validation. It begins with inner alignment, and your alignment has begun. You are not who you were, and you will not return to who you were. The past version of you was necessary for survival, but not for destiny. The universe has begun constructing the version of you capable of fulfilling the purpose you have sensed, but never fully articulated. That purpose is not grand in the external sense, it is grand in the psychological sense. It requires courage, integrity, depth, and the ability to withstand transformation without retreating. And you, without realizing it, have already proven that you can. And now, as the inner structure of your psyche shifts, something deeper begins to reveal itself, a gathering of power that does not resemble the aggressive force the world celebrates. It is quieter, more ancient, more sovereign. It comes from the part of you that has survived every disappointment, every abandonment, every collapse of certainty. This is the power of the self, the unshakable center of your psyche that never fractures, even when the personality falls apart. Most people never access this part of themselves. They cling to the ego, believing it is the entirety of who they are, unaware that behind its fragile surface exists an intelligence that has been guiding them silently through every chapter of their lives. This deeper intelligence has waited patiently, intervening only when your conscious mind was too overwhelmed or too blind to understand what was truly happening. It stepped in during moments when you thought you were losing everything. It whispered through intuition when logic failed. It arranged synchronicities when you doubted. It protected you from what you begged for but were not yet ready to receive. It steered you away from people who would have destroyed your spirit. And it has been brutally honest with you even when its honesty came disguised as heartbreak. This self, your inner nucleus, is the architect of your comeback. Not the ego, not the wounded child, not the fearful mind, not the longing heart. The comeback you are moving toward is being orchestrated from the deepest layer of your being. A layer the ego cannot manipulate or rush, and that is why it feels both inevitable and incomprehensible at the same time. When destiny rises from the unconscious, the ego is often the last to understand what is happening. You may feel it now, an odd combination of exhaustion and anticipation, as though one part of you is still grieving an old life, while another part has already stepped into a future your conscious mind has not yet fully seen. This inner split is not a flaw, it is the transition. One part of you is dissolving, another is emerging. One is losing its grip, another is strengthening its presence. The tension you feel is the psyche stretching between the known and the unknown. And all transformation requires this tension. Without it, nothing changes. You are not meant to resolve this tension prematurely. You are meant to endure it, because endurance deepens the soul. When you hold the tension between the fading old and the rising new, the psyche uses that pressure to birth something neither the ego nor the unconscious could create alone. It is through this symbolic pregnancy that the self reshapes you into someone capable of carrying the weight of a new destiny. But understand this clearly: destiny does not unfold for those who cling to who they once were. It unfolds for those who surrender not in defeat, but in trust. The universe is asking you to release the illusions that once defined your identity. The illusion that your worth came from the approval of others, the illusion that safety came from staying small, the illusion that love required self-abandonment, the illusion that suffering was your fate. These beliefs served a symbolic purpose in your earlier stages, but they cannot accompany the person you are becoming. They must fall away like autumn leaves, not because they were wrong, but because you have outgrown them. This outgrowing often feels like peeling off your own skin. You may feel vulnerable, exposed, uncertain, but vulnerability is the birthplace of inner power. The ego hardens itself to avoid pain, but the self dissolves what is unnecessary so that deeper strength can take its place. This is why many people misinterpret their emergence as weakness. They believe they are breaking down, when in truth they are breaking open. As the opening expands, your perceptions begin to change. You see through people more easily, not because you have become cynical, but because you are no longer enchanted by surface personalities. You sense hidden motives. You feel energies behind words. You recognize patterns that once slipped past your awareness. This heightened perception is not paranoia, it is psychic awakening. When the unconscious rises, the psyche expands beyond the boundaries of ordinary understanding. You start to perceive life symbolically, mystically, intuitively. Every encounter becomes meaningful. Every emotion becomes a message. Every obstacle becomes a symbol. This symbolic perception is one of the clearest signs of transformation. When you start seeing your life not as a sequence of random events, but as a story unfolding through archetypes, synchronicities, and emotional initiations, it becomes impossible to return to the superficial way you once lived. You begin to recognize yourself as a character in a sacred narrative, the narrative of individuation. The moment you see your life this way, the comeback becomes unavoidable, for no myth leaves the hero in the dark forest. No myth ends with a seeker lost in exile. All myths point toward transformation, not comfort, not ease, but emergence. And emergence often begins with anger, sadness, or a raw, unnameable longing. These emotions are not signs of regression. They are signals that the unconscious is trying to reorganize your inner world. When anger arises, it is often the psyche reclaiming boundaries you previously surrendered. When sadness floods you, it is often the mourning of an identity you no longer wish to carry. When longing burns in your chest, it is the call of the future, self inviting you toward a life that feels more aligned than anything you have known. Do not suppress these emotions. They are sacred messengers. They are eruptions of truth in a life that once required you to stay numb. And numbness, although it protected you, also prevented you from expanding. The universe cannot prepare a soul for a comeback when that soul refuses to feel. Feeling is a gateway to transformation. Emotion is the language of the unconscious. What you feel intensely is often the clue to what the self is trying to awaken. And as you awaken, you begin to realize that the people who misunderstood you were never meant to understand this version of you. They were interacting with earlier chapters, earlier layers, earlier wounds. They could not see your depths because they were mirrors meant to reflect your limitations, not your potential. Some people in your life were not placed there to nourish you, but to reveal who you become when you are starved. And yet, even the ones who hurt you were part of the cosmic choreography. They played their symbolic role in breaking the shell around your deeper nature. In truth, no one has truly defeated you. They have only forced you to confront aspects of yourself that were waiting in the shadows. You were not betrayed, you were redirected. You were not diminished, you were refined. You were not abandoned, you were repositioned. All these experiences were the training ground for the comeback now gathering inside you. And make no mistake, your comeback will not be loud at first. It will be subtle, like dawn rising after a long winter night. You will feel it before others see it. Something inside you will become steady. The anxiety that once consumed you will lose its sharpness. The insecurities that once controlled you will lose their voice. The illusions that once trapped you will no longer seduce you. You will walk differently, speak differently, choose differently. People will sense the shift without knowing its origin. They will feel something new in your presence, a gravity, a clarity, a groundedness that was not there before. This inner clarity will begin shaping your external reality. Opportunities will appear that would have passed you by in earlier seasons. Conversations will open doors you did not know existed. People aligned with your truth will gravitate toward you, drawn not by your persona, but by your authenticity. And those who cannot resonate with the person you are becoming will quietly fade away. As naturally as leaves falling from a tree, this is not loss. It is alignment, and as alignment deepens, you begin to understand why the universe withheld certain things from you in the past. You were not ready, not because you were unworthy, but because your internal architecture could not yet sustain what you desired. The psyche protects you by delaying what would overwhelm you prematurely. What you interpreted as failure was often preparation. What you called rejection was often timing. What you labeled stagnation was often gestation. You have been gestating for a long time, longer than you realize. The unconscious does not rush its creations. It waits until the soil of your being is fertile, until the old roots have loosened sufficiently, until the new identity can anchor itself without collapsing, and you, through grief, confusion, heartbreak, and persistence, have finally reached that state of readiness. You may not feel ready, but readiness is not a feeling. It is an inner condition, a stabilization of psychological forces that once operated chaotically. This stabilization is happening now. You are beginning to hold yourself differently, not with desperation, but with dignity, not with fear, but with curiosity, not with self-doubt, but with quiet certainty. This certainty is not loud or dramatic. It is a knowing, a deep inner sense that nothing in your life has been wasted, that every wound has shaped you, that every loss has carved space, that every ending has prepared the atmosphere for what is beginning to rise. And what rises now is something you once dreamed of, but did not believe possible. A version of you unbound by past conditioning, a version of you unafraid of your own depth, a version of you capable of standing alone without collapsing inward, a version of you who has walked through darkness and returned with light, a version of you who knows that destiny does not shout, it whispers, and you have finally learned to listen. Your comeback is not ahead of you. It is inside you, unfolding moment by moment, breath by breath, symbol by symbol. You are not waiting for the universe. The universe is waiting for you to recognize what you have already become. And so we arrive at the final turn of your inner journey, the moment when the unconscious, having stirred your depths and shaken the foundations of your old life, begins guiding you towards the emergence you could not yet name. You may feel an unfamiliar stillness settling into your body, a quiet certainty beneath the uncertainties of daily life, as though a deeper layer of yourself has finally taken the reins. This is not imagination, this is integration. Integration is the point at which the fragments of your psyche, the wounded child, the shadow, the forgotten strengths, the suppressed instincts, the unclaimed archetypes begin to weave themselves into a unified whole. This weaving is delicate, sacred work. It happens slowly, like dawn creeping over the horizon, illuminating what was once hidden. You may not notice the transformation in dramatic ways. Instead, it reveals itself subtly through small shifts in how you respond to life. Moments where you would have collapsed into fear now find you breathing with clarity. Situations that once pulled you into chaos now meet a calmer version of you. Encounters that would have wounded you deeply now lose their power. This is how the self announces its presence, not through spectacle, but through quiet authority. You have spent much of your life governed by forces you could not see, inherited patterns, unconscious drives, unexamined fears, internalized expectations. You lived through scripts written long before you had the awareness to question them, but awareness has now entered the story, and awareness is the beginning of freedom. When you become aware of your conditioning, you loosen its grip. When you become aware of your patterns, you interrupt their momentum. When you become aware of what hurts you, you no longer let it define you. Awareness does not instantly heal, but it creates the space for healing to occur. This space is where your comeback begins to take recognizable form, not as an external event, but as an internal state, a psychological sovereignty that cannot be taken from you. Many people chase outer success while ignoring the architecture of their inner world. They build castles with fragile foundations, but you have done the opposite. You have been rebuilding from the inside. Even when you believed you were falling apart, the universe chose to strengthen your foundation before giving you the structure. It forced you inward before allowing you to rise outward. This backward feeling, this inner first approach, is not a detour, it is the true path. For if you had risen earlier, before integrating your shadow, you would have recreated the same suffering in a different form. If you had succeeded prematurely, before healing your inner fractures, you would have built a life that eventually collapsed under its own weight. If you had been given what you asked for before you understood who you were, you would have traded authenticity for achievement, and that would not have been a comeback, it would have been another wound disguised as triumph. But you were not meant for such illusions. You were meant for depth, and depth requiert descent. Only those who have descended into themselves can rise without losing their soul. You have walked through chambers of your psyche that many avoid for their entire lives. You have faced parts of yourself that frightened you. You have confronted emotional truths that made you tremble. You have survived nights of profound silence where it felt as if the universe had turned its face away. But the universe was not absent. It was teaching you to hear the whispers you had once ignored. These whispers were the voice of the self, calling you not toward comfort, but toward wholeness. Wholeness is not the removal of suffering. It is the ability to hold suffering and meaning in the same breath. It is the capacity to remain rooted while the storms of life pass through. It is the recognition that everything you have lived, every heartbreak, every loss, every setback has served as an initiation into the deeper layers of your nature. Nothing was wasted, not a single tear, not a single disappointment, not a single moment of confusion. All of it was shaping the contours of your inner strength. And that strength is the very reason your comeback will be unstoppable. You have not merely endured, you have transformed, and transformation is irreversible. The psyche does not shrink after it expands. Once you become conscious of your patterns, they cannot deceive you in the same way. Once you see the archetypes operating within you, you cannot return to a smaller identity. Once the self steps forward, the ego can no longer pretend to be the center. This shift may feel like reclaiming your life from forces you once felt powerless against, not because those forces have disappeared, but because your relationship to them has changed. You may find yourself no longer chasing what once consumed your energy. You may find that external validation holds no allure. You may notice that your boundaries no longer tremble under pressure. You may realize that your silence has become stronger than your explanations. This is the mark of an emerging self, the movement from reactivity to sovereignty. Sovereignty is not dominance or control. It is inner freedom, the ability to choose your responses consciously rather than being triggered by old wounds. It is the quiet strength that emerges when your center no longer depends on the shifting weather of the outer world. It is the clarity that allows you to navigate life with grounded intuition rather than fear. And intuition is one of the clearest signs of a soul preparing to rise. When you stop forcing and start sensing, when you stop pushing and start aligning, the universe responds with precision. Paths open, encounters shift, possibilities multiply. This is the beginning of magnetism, the mysterious pull that arises when a person steps into alignment with their truth. You may notice that you attract people who resonate with your depth. You may find yourself in conversations that open doorways. You may feel opportunities finding you instead of you chasing them. This is not luck. This is coherence. When your inner world becomes coherent, your outer world follows. The universe mirrors your psychological state, and your state is shifting from fragmentation to wholeness. This wholeness brings a new kind of clarity, a clarity that reveals what truly matters to your soul. You may discover that things you once desperately wanted have lost their power over you. You may realize that some dreams were born from wounds rather than wisdom. You may release ambitions that belonged to a version of you who was trying merely to survive. And in this release, new dreams emerge, dreams that align with your essence rather than your ego. These dreams feel different, lighter, yet more profound. They do not provoke anxiety, they evoke resonance. They do not demand urgency, they invite patience. They do not arise from comparison, they arise from authenticity. When the self gives you a vision, it is never accompanied by panic. It is accompanied by recognition, a sense of, yes, this is mine, And this recognition is the compass of your comeback, but you are not simply returning, you are returning transformed, and because you are transformed, your life cannot unfold the way it once did. You will no longer fit into environments that require you to shrink. You will no longer tolerate relationships that demand self-abandonment. You will no longer participate in cycles that contradict your inner truth. These shifts may unsettle those who knew you only as your former self. But their discomfort is not your burden. You are not betraying anyone by becoming more fully yourself. Those who are meant to walk with you will rise with you. Those who cannot will drift naturally to their own path. This drifting is not tragedy, it is alignment. And alignment is the guiding force of the comeback you are stepping into. When your inner and outer worlds align, life becomes less about effort and more about unfolding. You recognize that what belongs to you is drawn to you by resonance, not by force. You understand that timing is not an obstacle, but a choreography. You trust that the universe is not against you, but is conspiring with your unconscious to guide you toward your potential. This trust is the final initiation. It is the leap from fear to faith, not blind faith, but psychological faith, the knowing that the unconscious acts with purpose, even when the conscious mind does not understand. When you trust this inner movement, to no longer fear the unknown, you begin to feel curious, even excited about what lies ahead. For the first time in a long time, you sense that your future is expanding rather than narrowing. And this expansion is the essence of your unstoppable comeback. You are not rising as the person you once were. You are rising as someone who has faced themselves, someone who has walked through their own darkness and returned with insight, someone who has learned to listen to the symbolic language of their dreams, someone who has integrated their shadow rather than projecting it, someone who has reclaimed their sovereignty from the narratives that once imprisoned them, someone who knows that true power does not shout, it emanates. You may not fully see it yet, but the universe sees it. Your unconscious sees it. Life is rearranging itself around the new center that has formed within you. The path ahead is not without challenges, but you are no longer the person who fears challenges. You have already endured what you thought would break you. You have already survived what you thought you could not survive. And now, something in you stands taller. Even in silence, your comeback will not be a return to the old. It will be an emergence into the true, a slow, powerful rising of the self after a long season of inner exile. A re-entry into life with depth in your eyes and clarity in your soul. A remembrance of who you were before the world wounded you into forgetting. And when the world sees you again, they will sense something different. They will not be able to name it, but they will feel it, the steadiness, the presence, the quiet strength. They will wonder how you became who you are. They will not know the nights you survived, the shadows you faced, the illusions you shed, the selves you outgrew, they will only see the light that remains after the fire, and you, standing in the truth of who you have become, will realize something profound. You were never being prepared for a comeback in the world sense of the word. You were being prepared for a return to yourself, and that is the most unstoppable comeback of all